The morning sun rose over the green hills of New Cascadia, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Farmers were already walking through their fields, checking on crops that would feed millions across human space. Children waited at transport stations for school shuttles. Shop owners opened their doors and prepared for another peaceful day. None of them knew that everything was about to change. High above the planet, beyond the thin layer of atmosphere that protected all life below, 300 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They appeared like dark spots against the stars, each one massive and covered in weapons that could turn cities into ash. These ships belonged to the Velthari Dominion, an empire that had conquered over 2,000 species across 10,000 years of galactic history. Supreme Commander Kethvoran stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest. He was tall even by Velthari standards, with gray-blue skin and 4 eyes that had witnessed the fall of countless civilizations. His chest was covered in medals earned through a lifetime of victory. He had never lost a battle. He had never shown mercy to an enemy. He was the finest warrior the Dominion had ever produced. Today, he would add another species to the long list of the conquered. Open a channel to the planet below, Kethvoran commanded. His voice was deep and carried the weight of absolute authority. His communications officer obeyed instantly. A moment later, a holographic screen appeared, showing a human female sitting behind a desk. She had dark skin, gray hair tied back neatly, and calm brown eyes. According to Velthari intelligence, this was Administrator Priya Sharma, the leader of this colonial world. Kethvoran expected fear. He expected the wide eyes and trembling voices he had seen from thousands of alien leaders before her. He expected desperate pleas and offers of surrender. The human woman simply raised one eyebrow and waited. "I am Supreme Commander Kethvoran of the Velthari Dominion," he announced. "Your species has expanded into space claimed by the Dominion. You have 30 standard hours to surrender unconditionally. All humans on this world and throughout your territory will become subjects of the Dominion. Your military forces will be disbanded. Your governments will be dissolved. Your people will serve us for the rest of time." He paused, giving her a moment to process the complete destruction of everything she knew. Administrator Sharma looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something no conquered species had ever done before. She smiled. "That's quite a demand," she said. Her voice was pleasant, as if they were discussing the weather. "I'll need to pass this along to the proper authorities. These decisions are above my level, you understand." Kethvoran felt something strange in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as confusion. "You do not seem to understand your situation. 300 warships orbit your world. We could reduce your cities to rubble within hours." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Sharma replied. She leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed. "It's just that I'm not authorized to surrender humanity. That would require approval from the Terran Council. And they're going to want to discuss this properly. These things take time. You dare to make us wait. I dare to follow proper procedure." She smiled again, and there was something in that smile that made Kethvoran deeply uncomfortable. "Tell you what, why don't you and your officers come down to the surface? I'll have tea prepared. We can wait together while the council makes their decision." Tea. She was offering him tea. Kethvoran had conquered worlds where the inhabitants threw themselves at his feet, begging for their lives. He had watched proud emperors weep as their empires crumbled. He had broken the spirits of warrior cultures that had fought for generations. This human woman was offering him tea. "You are either very brave or very foolish," Kethvoran said slowly. "Probably both," Sharma admitted. "But hospitality costs nothing, and I was raised to be polite. The offer stands, Commander. We have excellent tea on New Cascadia, grown right here in our own fields." Kethvoran closed the channel without responding. He turned to his senior advisors, who had watched the exchange with growing uncertainty. "What do we know about these humans?" he demanded. His intelligence chief, a thin Velthari named Sorn, quickly pulled up holographic displays, showing everything the Dominion had gathered about humanity. "They are a young species, Supreme Commander. They achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 centuries ago. Their total population across all colonies is approximately 40 billion, a tiny fraction of Dominion subjects. Their military technology appears adequate but unremarkable. They have never fought a major interstellar war." "Then why did that female not fear me?" Sorn hesitated. "I do not know, Supreme Commander. Perhaps she is simply ignorant of the threat she faces. She did not seem ignorant. Kethvoran studied the data floating before him. Population statistics, economic output, military strength. Everything pointed to an easy conquest. And yet, what of their history? He asked. Before they reached space, Sorn manipulated the display. They are a species born from conflict. Their homeworld's history is filled with wars between their own nations. They nearly destroyed themselves several times through warfare and environmental damage. They seem to have a talent for violence. All primitive species fight among themselves. It means nothing. Yes, Supreme Commander, but there is something unusual. Sorn highlighted a section of the data. They stopped. Stopped? Their major wars ended approximately 400 years ago. Since then, they have maintained relative peace among themselves. They unified their world government and began expanding into space. The transition was remarkably fast. Kethvoran considered this. Species that fought constantly were easy to conquer. You simply allied with one faction against another, let them weaken each other, then swept in to claim everything. But a species that had learned to stop fighting itself, that had found a way to unite, he pushed the thought aside. It didn't matter. The Velthari had conquered species far older and more advanced than humanity. They had broken empires that had stood for millions of years. One young species with a few decades of space travel would present no real challenge. We will give them their 30 hours, Kethvoran decided. When they fail to surrender, we will demonstrate what happens to those who defy the Dominion. The hours passed slowly. Kethvoran spent them reviewing battle plans and preparing his fleet for the assault. His officers ran simulations showing how quickly human defenses would fall. Everything pointed to an easy victory. 29 hours after his ultimatum, a response finally came from human space. It was not a surrender. A single ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the edge of the system. It was small compared to Velthari warships, barely larger than a transport vessel. It broadcast no weapon signatures. It simply sat there, waiting. Then it transmitted a message. Kethvoran watched as a human male appeared on his view screen. The man wore a simple military uniform with no medals or decorations. He had short gray hair, weathered skin, and eyes that had seen things Kethvoran couldn't begin to imagine. "I am Admiral Thomas Okonkwo of the Terran Defense Force," the man said. His voice was calm and steady. "I am responding on behalf of the Terran Council to your demand for humanity's surrender." "And what is their response?" Kethvoran asked. He already knew the answer. He could see it in the human's eyes. Admiral Okonkwo smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it carried the same strange confidence Kethvoran had seen in Administrator Sharma. "We accept your challenge," Okonkwo said. "Name the battlefield." The transmission ended. Kethvoran stared at the empty screen for a long moment. Around him, his officers shifted uncomfortably. None of them had ever seen a species respond to Dominion threats with such complete lack of fear. "They accept our challenge?" one of his captains whispered. "They have one ship. We have 300. What are they thinking?" Kethvoran didn't answer. He was thinking about the human woman's smile, about the human admiral's calm eyes, about a species that had nearly destroyed itself through war and somehow learned to stop. They were not afraid. They should be afraid. Everything in Velthari experience said they should be terrified. Instead, they smiled and offered tea and asked him to name the battlefield. For the first time in his long career, Supreme Commander Kethvoran felt the cold touch of doubt in his heart. He crushed the feeling ruthlessly. He was the greatest warrior of the greatest empire in the galaxy. He had never lost. "The moon's orbit," he declared. "We will destroy whatever pitiful fleet they send against us in the shadow of their own colony. Let them watch as we break their defenders. Let them understand that resistance is meaningless." His officers cheered, their confidence restored by his certainty. But deep in the back of his mind, in a place he would never admit existed, Kethvoran wondered if he had just made a terrible mistake. 3 days later, the Terran fleet arrived. There were 47 ships, against 300, and on the bridge of the lead human vessel, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin looked at the massive Velthari armada filling her view screen and smiled. "All ships," she said calmly. "Prepare for combat. Remember your training. Remember why we fight. And remember that we are humanity." Across the fleet, 10,000 human souls prepared to show the galaxy what happened when you threatened their home. The Velthari had sent their best. Humanity was ready. Supreme Commander Kethvoran stood at the center of his war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing every ship in both fleets. His 300 warships formed a perfect crescent formation, weapons charged and shields at full power. Across the void, the human fleet hung motionless against the stars. 47 ships. The number seemed like a joke. Analysis complete, Supreme Commander, his tactical officer reported. The human vessels appear to be standard cruiser-class ships. Their weapon systems read as plasma-based, comparable to early Dominion technology. Shield output is approximately 60% of our own. At current force ratios, complete victory is projected within 2 hours. Kethvoran nodded slowly. Everything his sensors told him confirmed what he already knew. The humans were outmatched in every measurable way. This battle would be remembered as another footnote in the Dominion's endless conquests. And yet, the human ships hadn't moved. They hadn't attempted to flee or call for reinforcements. They simply waited, as if 300 warships pointed at them meant nothing at all. Open a channel, Kethvoran commanded. He wanted to see their faces one more time before the slaughter began. He wanted to understand why they weren't afraid. The view screen flickered, and Admiral Chen Wei-Lin appeared. She was an older woman with silver hair and a face carved by decades of experience. She sat in her command chair with the relaxed posture of someone enjoying an afternoon rest. Commander Kethvoran, she said pleasantly. Thank you for choosing such a scenic location for our meeting. The view of New Cascadia from here is quite beautiful. You face annihilation, and you speak of scenery. I find it helps to appreciate beauty, even in difficult moments. Chen smiled. I assume you're calling to offer us a chance to surrender before the battle begins? I am calling to witness your final moments of false courage. In minutes, your fleet will be destroyed. Your people will watch their protectors burn, and then the Dominion will claim this world and everything your species has built. Chen tilted her head slightly. That's certainly one possible outcome. Would you like to hear another? Speak quickly. My patience has limits. In this version, Chen said, you attack us with your standard opening assault, the Crimson Fleet's signature tactic. If I'm not mistaken, a coordinated strike from multiple angles designed to overwhelm enemy shields through sustained fire. It's worked well for you against other species. Kethvoran's eyes narrowed. How did she know their tactics so precisely? Chen continued. You'll expect us to scatter or retreat. When we don't, you'll assume we're frozen by fear or confusion. You'll press harder, committing more ships to the assault. She leaned forward slightly. And that's when you'll realize that we wanted you to attack us first. We wanted to see everything you could do. Because that's how we learn. You learn nothing if you're dead. True. But we won't be dead. Chen's smile faded, replaced by something harder. Commander, I'm going to give you one chance to avoid what comes next. Turn your fleet around. Leave this system. Tell the Dominion that humanity is not worth the cost of conquest. Kethvoran felt his rage building. This human dared to offer him mercy? Him, the Supreme Commander of the Crimson Fleet? You insult me. I'm trying to save your lives, all of them. Every Velthari serving under your command. Enough. Kethvoran cut the transmission and turned to his officers. All ships, begin attack pattern, Crimson Dawn. Destroy them. The Velthari fleet moved like a well-trained predator. Ships broke from formation in perfect coordination, sweeping toward the human vessels from 3 directions at once. Weapons batteries charged with the distinctive whine of plasma accelerators. Thousands of missiles locked onto targets. Kethvoran watched with satisfaction as the first wave of fire erupted across space. Brilliant streams of plasma and explosives raced toward the motionless human ships. This would be over quickly. The barrage struck the human shields. Energy flared across their hulls. Sensors showed shield percentages dropping under the assault. The human ships shuddered from the impacts. They didn't move. Maintain fire, Kethvoran ordered, though a thread of unease was beginning to form in his mind. Press the attack. The second wave of fire crashed against the human fleet. More shield flashes. More damage indicators. The lead human ship's shields dropped to 40%. Still, they didn't move. Why aren't they retreating? One of his captains asked. Their shields are failing. They should be running. Fear has frozen them. another officer suggested. They've finally realized they can't win. But Kethvoran wasn't so sure. Admiral Chen's eyes had shown no fear. Her voice had carried no tremor of doubt. She had spoken with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what would happen next. Then the human flagship broadcast a message on all channels. Admiral Chen's face appeared on every screen in the Velthari fleet. She spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. "Thank you for showing us everything. Now it's our turn." The human ships moved. Kethvoran had fought countless battles. He had seen every tactic, every strategy, every desperate maneuver a dying species could attempt. He thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The human ships didn't retreat. They didn't scatter. They accelerated directly into the heart of the Velthari formation, moving with impossible speed. Their damaged shields somehow stabilized as they flew. And their weapons, the first human ship to fire, released something Kethvoran had never seen before. It wasn't plasma. It wasn't missiles. It was a beam of pure white light that cut through a Velthari cruiser's shields like they weren't there. The cruiser's hull split open, spilling fire and debris into space. 3 seconds later, another Velthari ship died. Then another. Then 5 more. "What is happening?" Kethvoran demanded. His tactical displays were chaos. Human ships were everywhere, moving in patterns that defied prediction. They seemed to know exactly where his ships would be before they got there. "What are those weapons?" "Unknown, Supreme Commander," his tactical officer shouted. "The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. They're cutting through our shields like they're not even there." The Velthari tried to respond. They were the finest warriors in the galaxy, veterans of 1,000 conquests. They fought back with everything they had. It wasn't enough. Human ships danced between Velthari formations, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. When a Velthari ship managed to get a lock, the human vessel would suddenly change direction in ways that should have torn it apart. When Velthari weapons hit their targets, the human shields absorbed damage that should have destroyed them. And those terrible white beams kept firing. Kethvoran watched as the Crimson Fleet, the pride of the Dominion, was systematically torn apart by ships that were supposed to be inferior in every way. "How is this possible?" he whispered. On the screen, a human cruiser flew directly at a Velthari battleship 5 times its size. The battleship unleashed everything it had: plasma, missiles, kinetic rounds. The human ship took the barrage head-on, shields flashing frantically, and kept coming. At the last moment, it rolled beneath the battleship's hull and fired its white beam directly into the engine section. The battleship exploded. The human ship flew through the expanding debris field, damaged but alive, and immediately engaged its next target. "They're insane," Kethvoran's second-in-command said, his voice hollow with shock. "No species fights like this. No species takes risks like this. They should be dead. They should all be dead." But they weren't dead. The humans were winning. An hour into the battle, Kethvoran looked at his tactical display and felt something he had never experienced before: despair. 150 of his ships were gone, destroyed, disabled, or drifting without power. The humans had lost 12. 12? His 300 elite warships were being defeated by 47 vessels that his own analysts had dismissed as inferior technology. "Supreme Commander," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the human flagship." Kethvoran wanted to refuse. He wanted to keep fighting until the last ship, the last breath, the last heartbeat. But he also wanted to understand. "Show me." Admiral Chen appeared on screen. Behind her, Kethvoran could see her bridge crew working calmly at their stations. No panic, no desperation, just quiet efficiency. "Commander," Chen said, "I'd like you to look at something." The view screen split, showing a tactical overview of the battlefield. The Velthari fleet was scattered, broken, ships either destroyed or struggling to maintain formation. The human fleet had reformed into a tight group at the center of the chaos. "We've stopped firing," Chen observed. "Have you noticed?" Kethvoran looked more closely. She was right. The human ships were holding position, their weapons silent. "We could destroy the rest of your fleet," Chen continued. "Every last ship, every last life. We have the power to do that." She paused. "But we're choosing not to." "Why?" The word escaped Kethvoran before he could stop it. Because killing isn't our purpose. Conquest isn't our nature. We fought because you gave us no choice. We won because that's what we do when we have no choice. Chen's expression softened slightly. I'm offering you the chance to survive. Take your remaining ships and go home. Tell your Dominion what happened here. Tell them that we could have killed you all, and we didn't. Kethvoran stared at her. In 10,000 years of Dominion history, no enemy had ever offered mercy. The strong conquered the weak. That was the only law that mattered. Why would you spare us? He asked. Because every person on those ships has a family waiting for them. Because your soldiers are following orders, just like mine. Because death should be the last option, not the first. Chen leaned forward. And because I want you to deliver a message, I want you to tell everyone who will listen what happened when the Dominion sent its best against humanity. The transmission ended, but the human fleet didn't attack. They waited. Kethvoran looked at the burning ruins of his command. Half his fleet was gone. The survivors were damaged, demoralized, unable to continue fighting. He thought about ordering a final charge, one last glorious assault against an enemy that refused to behave like an enemy. But what would that accomplish? More death, more destruction, and the humans would still win. For the first time in his life, Supreme Commander Kethvoran gave an order to retreat. As his battered fleet limped away from New Cascadia, he looked back at the human ships holding perfect formation among the debris. They hadn't chased. They hadn't fired on his retreating vessels. They had simply stopped fighting the moment they had won. He didn't understand these humans. He didn't understand their weapons, their tactics, or their mercy, but he was beginning to understand fear. Captain Maria Santos gripped the arms of her command chair as her ship, the Resilience, dove straight into the heart of the Velthari formation. Alarms screamed warnings. Her shields flickered under constant fire. Around her, the bridge crew worked with focused intensity, every person doing their job without hesitation. Shields at 32%. Her tactical officer called out, "Hull breach on deck 7. Damage control teams responding. Keep us moving," Santos ordered. "Ensign Park, bring us around the stern of that battle cruiser. Weapons, target their shield generators." The Resilience twisted through a storm of plasma fire. Santos felt the ship shudder as another blast struck home. A lesser vessel would have broken apart minutes ago. A lesser crew would have fled or surrendered. But the Resilience and her crew were human. They had been born on a world that had tried to kill their ancestors with ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and diseases beyond counting. They had survived because giving up simply wasn't in their nature. The battle cruiser filled their view screen, massive and bristling with weapons. Its commanders probably couldn't believe that a ship 1/5 their size was charging directly at them. That disbelief gave Santos the seconds she needed. Fire, the particle lance, humanity's answer to a galaxy that had underestimated them, released its energy. The white beam punched through the battlecruiser's shields like a knife through paper. Secondary explosions rippled across the massive vessel's hull as vital systems failed. Santos was already looking for her next target before the battlecruiser finished dying. This was how humans fought. Not with elegant formation tactics or by-the-book strategies, but with fury and flexibility and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Every captain in the fleet had the authority to make their own decisions in battle. Every crew member was trained to adapt when plans fell apart. The Velthari couldn't understand it. They fought the way they had always fought, following orders from their supreme commander, executing tactics that had worked for 10,000 years. They couldn't adapt fast enough when those tactics stopped working. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out on every human vessel. Commander James Okafor of the Defiant had lost his main weapons array in the first minutes of fighting. Instead of retreating, he had accelerated toward a group of Velthari destroyers and rammed his damaged ship into their formation, using his weakened shields as a battering ram. His crew had then boarded the nearest enemy vessel and taken it by force, while Okafor used the destroyer's own weapons against its former allies. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka of the Vigilant had noticed that Velthari's shields flickered slightly during their weapons cycling. She had shared this observation with the fleet, and within minutes, every human ship was timing their shots to exploit the weakness. By the battle's end, her discovery had helped destroy 40 Velthari vessels. Chief Engineer Hassan Mahmoud on the Indomitable had rerouted power from life support to weapons when his ship's shields failed completely. His crew fought in freezing darkness, wearing emergency suits. But they kept fighting. When they ran out of ammunition, Mahmoud converted their fabrication systems to produce more. When those systems broke down, he fabricated repairs for the fabricators. He refused to let his ship die. These weren't special cases. These were typical examples of how humans responded to impossible odds. On the bridge of the flagship Constellation, Admiral Chen Wei-lin coordinated the battle while simultaneously reviewing every piece of data her sensors gathered. She wasn't just trying to win this fight. She was learning everything she could about Velthari capabilities, tactics, and psychology. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're picking up internal transmissions from several Velthari ships. They're requesting permission to retreat. Their commanders are denying the requests." Chen nodded. "Note which ships are asking. Those are the ones whose crews might be reasoned with later." She paused. "Also note which commanders are refusing. Those are the true believers. They'll be harder to reach." This was also how humans fought. Not just with weapons, but with understanding. Every enemy was a potential future ally. Every battle was an opportunity to learn and to teach. Chen thought about the history lessons she had learned as a child. About the world wars that had killed hundreds of millions. About the environmental collapse that had nearly ended civilization. About the long peace that had finally emerged when humanity realized that continuing to fight each other meant extinction. Her grandmother had survived the Pacific flooding, when rising seas had drowned entire nations. Her grandfather had fought in the last resource war, when water shortages had nearly driven humanity back to barbarism. They had both lived to see the founding of the Terran Council, the moment when humanity had finally chosen to unite. "We learned the hard way," her grandfather had told her once. "We learned that the only thing worse than your enemy is the hatred that makes you become your enemy." Chen carried those words with her through every battle. The Velthari were threatening everything humanity had built. They deserved to be fought with every weapon available. But they didn't deserve to be hated. Hate was the real enemy. Hate was what had almost destroyed humanity. Hate was what they had spent centuries learning to overcome. "Admiral," her tactical officer said, "Supreme Commander Keth Voran's flagship is attempting to rally the remaining Velthari ships. They're forming a defensive sphere." Chen studied the display. The Velthari were scared now. She could see it in their desperate formation, in the way their damaged ships huddled together for protection. They had expected an easy victory, and found something terrible instead. Good. Fear was educational. Fear might save their lives. "All ships," Chen ordered. "Hold position. Cease fire." The order went out, and one by one, human weapons fell silent. The sudden quiet was almost shocking after the chaos of battle. "Ma'am," her first officer asked, "we have them on the run. Why are we stopping?" "Because running isn't dying." Chen watched the Velthari formation on her display. They weren't retreating yet, but they weren't attacking either. They were waiting to see what the humans would do. "We've won. Now we need to make sure they understand what that means." She opened a channel to the Velthari flagship. Supreme Commander Keth Voran's face appeared on her screen. The arrogance she had seen in their first conversation was gone. In its place was confusion, anger, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. "We could destroy the rest of your fleet," Chen told him. "Every last ship, every last life. We have the power to do that. But we're choosing not to." She watched his reaction carefully. Understanding wouldn't come immediately. He was from a culture where mercy was weakness and conquest was the only measure of worth. But somewhere inside him, there was a being capable of growth. "Why?" Keth Voran demanded. The word seemed to cost him something. Chen told him the truth. She told him about families waiting at home, about soldiers following orders, about death being a last resort. She told him to take his survivors home and deliver a message to his masters. When the transmission ended, she turned to her crew. They were exhausted, wounded, and running on nothing but determination. Several stations showed damage alerts. The smell of burned electronics hung in the recycled air. But they had won. "Well done," Chen said simply. "All of you. Well done." The Velthari fleet began its retreat, and the human ships let them go. There was no cheering on the human bridges, no celebrations of victory, just quiet relief and bone-deep exhaustion. Admiral Chen stood at her view screen and watched the enemy disappear into the darkness of space. She thought about what would happen next. The Dominion wouldn't accept this defeat quietly. They would send more ships, more weapons, more soldiers. The war wasn't over. But today, humanity had proven something important. They had shown that a species could be both strong enough to win and wise enough to show mercy. They had demonstrated that victory didn't require destruction. Chen hoped the Velthari would learn from this. She hoped they would carry the lesson home and share it with their leaders. She hoped that someday, somehow, this battle would lead to peace instead of more war. If not, humanity would fight again, and again, and again, if necessary. They would never stop fighting for their survival and their values, but they would also never stop hoping for something better. Set a course for New Cascadia, Chen ordered finally. Let's go home. The constellation turned slowly, its battered hull reflecting the light of distant stars. Behind it, the debris of the battle drifted silently through space, a reminder of what happened when the universe underestimated humanity. And in the hearts of every human in the fleet, a quiet pride burned. Not pride in killing, not pride in conquest, but pride in who they had chosen to be. They were humanity. They were protectors. They were merciful, and they had shown the galaxy that those things made them stronger, not weaker. Admiral Chen allowed herself one small smile before turning to the work that still needed to be done. There would be wounded to treat, ships to repair, reports to file. The universe didn't pause to let victors rest. But for one moment, in the quiet between battles, she felt the weight of her grandmother's survival and her grandfather's sacrifice. And she knew they would be proud. Humanity had faced the darkness and chosen light. Now they had to hope the darkness was capable of learning. The shuttle carrying Supreme Commander Keth Varan approached the human flagship through a field of debris that had once been his fleet. Shattered hulls drifted past the viewport. Frozen bodies tumbled through the void. The remains of Velthari warships that had conquered 1,000 worlds now served as nothing more than obstacles to navigation. Keth Varan had never been aboard an enemy vessel before. He had never needed to. Enemies surrendered or died. There was no middle ground in Dominion warfare. Yet here he was, accepting an invitation from the humans who had just destroyed everything he had built his life around. Admiral Chen had asked him to meet in person, and against every instinct that had made him the Dominion's greatest warrior, he had agreed. He needed to understand. The shuttle docked with a gentle bump. Keth Varan rose from his seat and walked toward the airlock, flanked by 2 of his surviving officers. They had wanted him to bring guards. He had refused. If the humans intended to kill him, a few soldiers wouldn't matter. The airlock opened, and Keth Varan stepped onto a human ship for the first time. He expected chaos, battle damage, the desperate energy of a crew barely holding itself together after such an intense fight. Instead, he found order. The corridor was clean, well lit, and busy with crew members moving purposefully between stations. They glanced at him as he passed, but without hatred or triumph. They looked at him the way one might look at an interesting stranger. A young human officer met him at the airlock. She was small compared to Velthari standards, with dark skin and a calm, professional demeanor. Supreme Commander, welcome aboard the Constellation. I'm Lieutenant Adiemi. Admiral Chen is waiting for you. Please follow me. She led him through the ship without armed guards, without restraints, without any visible security presence at all. Keth Varan found this more unsettling than any display of force. They weren't afraid of him, even after watching him order the deaths of thousands. They simply weren't afraid. The lieutenant brought him to a small room with a wide window overlooking space. Inside, a table held cups and a steaming pot of some dark liquid. Admiral Chen sat in one of the chairs, her posture relaxed, her eyes steady. "Thank you for coming, Commander," she said. "Please, sit. Have some tea." "Tea?" Again with the tea. Keth Varan sat across from her, his officers taking positions behind him. "You have destroyed half my fleet. You have humiliated the greatest military force in the galaxy. And now you offer me tea. I'd offer you something stronger, but I wasn't sure about Veltari biology." Chen poured a cup and set it before him. "I'm not trying to humiliate you. I'm trying to help you understand something important. What could I possibly need to understand? You have superior weapons. You won. That is all that matters." Chen shook her head slowly. "Our weapons aren't that much better than yours. A little more advanced. Yes, but that's not why we won." "Then explain it to me." The demand came out harsher than Kethvoran intended. Explain how 47 ships destroyed 150 of mine. Explain how a species that has never fought a major war defeated warriors with 10,000 years of experience. Explain how you did the impossible. Chen was quiet for a moment. She picked up her own tea and took a small sip before answering. How much do you know about human history, Commander? Your intelligence file said you are a young species. You achieved space travel 3 centuries ago. Before that, you were a primitive culture fighting among yourselves. That's true. But do you know why we were fighting? Kethvoran had never considered the question. Species fought. It was natural. The strong dominated the weak. That was how the universe worked. We fought because we were scared, Chen continued. We fought over resources, over territory, over ideas. We fought because we didn't know how to solve problems any other way. And we were very, very good at it. She gestured toward the window. Beyond the glass, the debris field continued its slow drift through space. About 400 years ago, we reached a point where we could destroy ourselves completely. Not just kill millions, but end our entire species. We had weapons that could burn the atmosphere, poisons that could kill every living thing, the technology to make our homeworld uninhabitable. Chen's voice remained calm, but Kethvoran could hear something deeper beneath the words. Pain, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of terrible knowledge. We had to make a choice. We could keep fighting until someone finally pushed the button and ended everything, or we could learn to be different. She met his eyes. It was the hardest thing we ever did. Harder than any war. We had to look at our worst impulses and choose to reject them. You expect me to believe that you simply decided to stop fighting? No. We decided that fighting would only happen as a last resort, and only to protect, never to conquer. We built a society based on cooperation instead of domination. It took generations. We failed many times. But eventually, we became something new. Kethvoran felt the familiar contempt rising in his chest. This was weakness dressed up as philosophy. The Dominion had conquered 2,000 species by being stronger, not by holding hands and singing songs. Your philosophy is touching, he said coldly. But it doesn't explain how you won today. Of course it does. Chen set down her tea. We won because our people fight for something they believe in. They protect each other. They sacrifice for each other. They adapt and improvise because they know their lives matter to the people beside them. She leaned forward. Your soldiers fight because they're ordered to. They follow tactics because deviation means punishment. They're loyal to the Dominion because the alternative is death. A pause. We're loyal to each other because we choose to be. That makes us stronger. Pretty words? Results speak louder than words, Commander. Look at what remains of your fleet. Kethvoran had no response to that. Chen's voice softened. I didn't ask you here to gloat. I asked you here because you need to understand what happens next. You'll invade the Dominion. Conquer our worlds as we tried to conquer yours. No. The word hung in the air. Kethvoran waited for the qualification, the explanation of what humanity would demand instead. Nothing came. You could, he said finally. Your weapons could devastate us. We have no defense against those particle lances. You could carve a path through Dominion space and take everything. Yes, we could. Chen's eyes never wavered. We won't. Why? Because conquest doesn't end anything. It just creates new enemies, new resentments, new generations waiting for the chance to strike back. She shook her head. We learned that lesson the hard way. Over and over, throughout our history, the nations that tried to build empires through force all fell eventually. The only lasting peace comes from choice, not submission. Kethvoran thought about the Dominion's subject species, 2,000 civilizations, all conquered, all forced to serve. They were loyal because they had no choice. But if they ever had a choice, what do you want from us? He asked. I want you to go home. I want you to tell your leaders exactly what happened here. I want you to tell them that humanity could have destroyed you and chose mercy instead. Chen's voice hardened slightly. And I want you to tell them this. The next time anyone threatens our worlds, we will respond the same way. We will fight with everything we have, and we will win. But we will always, always offer peace to those who survive. They won't listen. The Dominion Council has ruled for 10,000 years. They won't change because one fleet was defeated. Maybe not immediately. Change takes time. But you've seen what we can do. You've felt it. Chen stood and walked to the window. Someday, your people will have a choice to make. Keep fighting us until one side is destroyed, or try something different. I hope they choose wisely. Keth Voran rose from his chair. His mind was churning with thoughts he had never allowed himself to have. Questions about the Dominion, about conquest, about the nature of strength itself. Why show me mercy? He asked. I ordered the attack on your world. I would have killed everyone on New Cascadia without hesitation. By any measure, I deserve death. Chen turned to face him. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, as if seeing something beyond his uniform and his medals and his reputation. Because you have the potential to be more than what you've been, she said finally. Because killing you would accomplish nothing except revenge. And revenge is a poison that destroys the one who drinks it. She paused. And because I believe that someday, you might understand what I've told you today, and you might help your people find a better way. She extended her hand in what Keth Voran recognized as a human gesture of respect. Go home, Commander. Think about what you've seen. And when the time comes to make a choice, remember that humanity chose mercy. Keth Voran looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. Her grip was firm and warm. There was strength in it, but also gentleness. It was, he realized, the grip of someone who had nothing to prove. I do not understand you, he admitted. Maybe that's a good place to start. She released his hand and nodded toward the door. Lieutenant Adeyemi will escort you back to your shuttle. Your fleet has been cleared for departure. No one will pursue you. Keth Voran walked to the door, then paused. Admiral Chen, if I deliver your message, and my leaders choose to send another fleet, what then? Chen's answer was simple and immediate. Then we'll be here waiting, and we'll make the same choice again. Keth Voran left without another word. As his shuttle pulled away from the constellation, he looked back at the human ship floating serenely among the wreckage of his fleet. For the first time in his long career, he wasn't thinking about victory or defeat. He was thinking about what it might mean to choose. And somewhere deep in his mind, in a place he had never known existed, a seed of doubt began to grow into something else entirely, something that felt almost like hope. The council chamber of the Veltari Dominion had witnessed 10,000 years of history. Its walls were carved from stone taken from conquered worlds, each section representing a species that had bent the knee to Dominion rule. The ceiling displayed a holographic map of the Empire, showing every star system under Velthari control. Today, every seat was filled. The 13 High Lords of the Dominion had gathered to hear the report of their greatest military defeat. Supreme Commander Keth Voran stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by beings who had once considered him the finest warrior in the galaxy. 3 months had passed since the Battle of New Cascadia, 3 months of travel through Dominion space. 3 months of thinking about everything Admiral Chen had said. He had entered this chamber hundreds of times before. He had always felt pride, confidence, certainty in his purpose. Now he felt something else entirely. Speak, Commander, High Lord Vetharan commanded. He was the eldest of the council, ancient even by Velthari standards, his gray-blue skin marked with the patterns of centuries of leadership. Tell us how you lost half the Crimson Fleet to a primitive species. Keth Voran began his report. He described the initial approach, the human refusal to surrender, the battle itself. He spoke of weapons that cut through Veltari shields like they were nothing. He spoke of tactics that adapted in real time, of captains who made decisions without waiting for orders, of crews who fought until the last breath. The council listened in silence. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to contempt to barely contained fury. And then, Keth Voran continued, when they had won, they stopped fighting. Stopped? High Lord Ketharan interrupted. She was the youngest of the council, known for her aggressive expansion into unclaimed territories. They stopped. They offered us mercy. They allowed my surviving ships to retreat without pursuit. They returned all captured prisoners without conditions. Keth Voran paused. They asked me to deliver a message. What message could they possibly have that we would want to hear? Keth Voran activated the recording Admiral Chen had given him. Her image appeared in the center of the chamber, life-sized and crystal clear. The council watched as Chen spoke. She told them about human history, about the wars that had nearly destroyed humanity, about the choice they had made to be different. She told them about strength through restraint and victory through mercy. She told them that humanity would always defend itself, but would never seek conquest. Then she delivered her final warning. We know what you'll consider doing. We know you'll think about sending more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. You can try, but understand this. Every species that has ever attacked humanity and lost has been given the same choice we're giving you now. Peace or annihilation. There is no middle ground. We don't conquer. We don't enslave. But we also don't lose. Ask yourselves, is whatever you hope to gain worth the certainty of your empire's end? The recording ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. The council chamber had witnessed countless reports of conquest, but it had never heard anything like this. High Lord Vetheron broke the silence. She threatens us. This primitive creature dares to threaten the Dominion. It's not a threat, Kethvaran said quietly. It's a statement of fact. You defend them? Ketharan's voice was sharp with disgust. You lost half your fleet to these animals, and now you speak as if they are equals? I watched them fight. I met their admiral. I saw what they could have done and chose not to do. Kethvaran turned to address the full council. They are not like any species we have conquered. They do not fight for resources or territory. They fight to protect. They fight because they believe in something beyond survival. Pretty philosophy. Another High Lord sneered. It means nothing. We will send a larger fleet. We will crush them. Will we? Kethvaran asked. How many ships? 1,000? 5,000. They defeated 300 of our best, with 47 vessels that our analysts dismissed as inferior. What happens when they have time to build more? What happens when they share their weapons technology with our subject species? That thought silenced the chamber. 2,000 conquered civilizations, all held in check by Dominion military superiority. If that superiority could be challenged, if the conquered species began to hope, we will attack before they can grow stronger, Ketharan declared. We will throw everything we have at them until they break. And if they don't break, Kethvaran asked. Every species breaks. Not this one. Kethvaran stepped forward, doing something he had never done before, directly challenging the council. I've spent 3 months thinking about what I saw. These humans nearly destroyed themselves through war. They fought to the edge of extinction, and then they changed. They chose to become something different. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Dominion has conquered through fear for 10,000 years. We are strong because others are weak. But what happens when we face an enemy that isn't afraid? What happens when our greatest strength means nothing? You suggest we surrender? Vetheron's voice dripped with contempt. I suggest we consider something we've never considered before. Not conquest. Not destruction. Something else. The council erupted in angry voices. Kethvaran stood at the center of the storm, waiting for it to pass. He had expected this reaction. He had prepared for it during the long journey home. Finally, Vetheron raised a hand for silence. You have changed, Commander. The warrior who left here would never have spoken such words. The warrior who left here had never been defeated. He had never been shown mercy by an enemy. Kethvaran met the ancient lord's eyes. I am not suggesting surrender. I am suggesting that we learn from what happened. The humans transformed themselves from a species of endless warfare into something stronger. Perhaps we can do the same. And what would that look like? Vetheran asked. His voice had lost some of its contempt. There was something else in it now. Curiosity, perhaps. Or exhaustion. I don't know. I only know that continuing on our current path leads to destruction. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not in a generation. But eventually, we will face something we cannot conquer, and we will fall. Kethvaran paused. Or we can choose a different path before it's too late. The council deliberated for hours. Arguments flew back and forth. Some demanded immediate military action. Others urged caution. A few, quietly, began to wonder if Kethvaran might be right. In the end, they reached no final decision. The Dominion was too old, too set in its ways, to change overnight. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the question had been asked. What if there was another way? 3 months later, Velthari diplomats arrived at New Cascadia. Their shuttle descended through clouds painted gold by the setting sun. Below, The same green hills that Kethvoran's fleet had threatened to destroy stretched toward the horizon. Farmers still worked their fields. Children still played in the streets. Life had continued, barely touched by the war that could have ended everything. Administrator Priya Sharma waited at the landing pad, surrounded by a small delegation of Terran officials. She watched the alien vessel touch down, remembering the day when 300 warships had filled her sky. The shuttle's door opened. 2 Velthari diplomats emerged, dressed not in military uniforms but in the formal robes of peaceful emissaries. They walked toward the humans with careful, uncertain steps. Sharma stepped forward to meet them. She smiled, the same warm expression she had shown to Supreme Commander Kethvoran during their first conversation. "Welcome to New Cascadia," she said. "We've been expecting you." The lead diplomat, a female named Sariveth, bowed stiffly. "The Dominion Council has sent us to discuss alternatives." "I'm glad to hear it." Sharma gestured toward a building nearby. "Please come inside. We have much to talk about." She paused, her smile widening slightly. "And I've prepared tea." Sariveth looked confused. "Tea? It's a human tradition. We share it when we're building something new." Sharma began walking toward the building, trusting the diplomats to follow. "It represents patience, warmth, and the belief that former enemies can become friends." The Velthari exchanged uncertain glances. Then, slowly, they followed. Behind them, the sun continued its descent toward the hills. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, human and Velthari ships patrolled their respective borders, watchful but not hostile. It wasn't peace. Not yet. 10,000 years of conquest couldn't be undone in a single conversation, or even 100 conversations. There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, moments when war seemed inevitable, but a door had been opened. A question had been asked, and for the first time in Dominion history, someone was listening for an answer. Administrator Sharma poured tea for beings who had come to destroy everything she loved. The Velthari diplomats accepted the cups with hands that had never held anything offered freely by another species. They drank together as the stars came out, and somewhere across the galaxy, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin received a message reporting that negotiations had begun. She read it twice, then set it aside, and looked out her window at the vastness of space. Humanity had sent a message with fire and mercy. The galaxy was finally starting to listen. It was, she thought, a good beginning.